Hello, and welcome back to the Gateways podcast. This is Gateways number 6. For me, it's a Saturday, and I hope you all enjoy. So today, we're going to be mainly focusing on a request I got from one of the people who are doing this kind of as a class. And they asked, how does one choose a chord progression? Since I have my key, I have my scale. Now, how do I choose the actual chords to use within that scale? So because you said within that scale, that means that you want specifically diatonic harmony. And the way that you create a scale, which is not a scale, a chord progression, with diatonic harmony normally revolves around chord functions. Now, the most common chord functions that you can see in a lot of music, like in the Baroque era, was the movement throughout the circle of fifths within a key. Now what that would mean is, like, diatonic to a key, you're essentially playing that key's triads in the order of the circle of fifths descending, right? Now what exactly does that mean? Well, let's say you're in the key of C major, right? So you know that C major triad, which is C, E, and G, is your tonic, which is what you're trying to get to resolve. Now, if you want to resolve diatonically within the key according to the circle of fifths, then the way you do that is you'd start on a chord, right? You know that G major, as G is the fifth of C in C major, G major to C major resolves really nicely. Well, then you think, what's the fifth of G? Well, the fifth of G is D. Now, if you play D, F, and A, because you're in C major, then you'd be playing D minor. And you continue to repeat this process until eventually you have a chord progression which is just constantly resolving according to the circle of fifths. Now, we have more developed harmony in the modern day because we use dissonance a lot more in creating more rich harmony, more emotional. But today I'm just going to talk about, like, how exactly do you develop a chord progression? How do you develop harmony? And I want to start that off by sharing a brief piece that I wrote, and then going over that piece and discussing, how did I come up with the harmony? How did I develop the piece? And hopefully it'll be able to help you in developing your pieces in the future. And then later, we're going to be taking the melody that the student wrote who asked me that question, and we'll be looking at it and talking about the ways in which he could develop the harmony. So I hope you enjoy. This is a song I made that I called Rainway. So that was Rainway. I hope you enjoyed, and now I'm gonna go more into the uh, like how I came up with the harmony, how I ended up developing the piece, and then after that we're gonna go into the student's piece that he'd sent me. So to begin, the way that I actually developed my chord progression was I developed it through just playing like these arpeggios on a small piano that I own. And if listening to this, if you've ever played Hollow Knight, then you probably know that this piece is inspired by some of the pieces in that game because I happen to have been playing it recently. So that's where the inspiration of this piece came from. And in a particular song called Green Path, I really liked the way that it started, and that it was like broken up triads, which sounded really beautiful. So I decided to use that idea, and I decided to change it from what it was originally into my own with more dissonant combinations of notes, because the original one is really beautiful and it's really melodic and the chords interact with each other in very interesting ways, but I wanted to make mine a bit more sad, a bit less lively. It's a bit more lonely, right? And it sounded a lot like this. So after creating that idea, right, and putting it down, I actually played on electric piano. I was like, this is a really interesting idea. It's really, I think it's really beautiful, and I think I can develop something from it. So then I took those little triads that I played, the broken up chords, and I put them, I made them play simultaneously. I was like, okay, so they work together, but how can I make them, more colorful? And like I talked about before in my more advanced chord structure segment, I talked a lot about how, adding tensions, adding these extra notes on top of what you originally had or below what you originally had can make your chord pop. It can make your chord a lot more, pleasant to listen to. It can add dissonance when you need it to. It can give that that bit of emotion that you really want to convey in creating your piece. So what I decided to do is I condensed them down into their their triadic forms. Then I decided, okay, let's add some tensions to them. And then the chord progression went from the original arpeggiated triads to this. Now, having heard that, I bet some of you, when listening to it, thought that the fifth chord of that little chord progression sounded off. Like there was something about it. It didn't resonate, like it wasn't comfortable. And I really liked the effect that had because, in terms of measures, that was the first chord that hit. And I thought that it told a very interesting story because of where it landed. Like it was very impactful and it was very sudden. Now, listening to these, I should explain that the way that I normally end up creating music is I kind of do it in that I create harmony first and then the melodic line second based around the harmony. It's almost like improvising. Like I improvise my melodic line based on the harmony that's happening. Because personally, I've written melodic lines and then writing chord progressions for them I find to be somewhat difficult. But for me personally, writing a harmonic environment first and then deciding where to place everything within that harmonic environment is really It's a lot easier and it's a lot more fun for me. So keeping that in mind, I then took this chord progression and decided, hey, how can I add like some form of interesting melodic line from it? Well, how did I derive my melodic line? I essentially took the chord progression and thought, what notes fit with each chord and what notes don't fit with each chord, and like what notes are more dissonant and have that like bit of emotion to them. And then that's how I ended up developing this melodic line, which is playing currently. And when you overlap that melodic line with the chord progression, I think it fits it really well. It's very sad, it's very lonely, and that was what I wanted. And that final note of that melodic line, I bet you also noticed that it sounded like it wanted to go somewhere. Well, there's two places that thing goes, that specific note. It goes back to the beginning of the melodic line because I want to repeat it, but it also leads into a second melodic line that I developed later, alongside, its own chord progression. And of course, I developed the chord progression first based on where that note wanted to go. And then from there, I, developed a melodic line, which you can hear now. Now, with this particular line, of course the development of the melody was the same as the previous one, in that it was based entirely around the chord progression it developed. But the thing about that line is I wanted to experiment a little more with the placement of each note. Because you notice that there were some times in that melodic line where there was a space, where the melodic line stopped, the chord came in, and then the next few notes of the melodic line came in. And I wanted to do that because what I was going for with this piece was kind of being alone, but at the same time you have like thoughts in your head. So that's where the idea came from, like the melodic line is you as just a being. You exist by yourself. But then the chords are kind of the feelings that are going around in your own head. And I thought that was an interesting concept. And it also, it kind of reminded me of the concept of rain, in that, again, you're alone, but the rain around you, there's so much of it, it's so dense that it just creates a really beautiful atmosphere. And that's kind of how I ended up developing my piece. Was I based it on, what kind of story do I want to tell? What is my end goal with this piece? And my end goal with this piece was to kind of convey how loneliness feels, especially during the time that this is being recorded. Currently, my entire country is under lockdown because of the current pandemic. So I was like, let's make a piece that represents loneliness. And I know that a lot of people here, when they hear loneliness, they instantly think bad things, but I kind of think being alone is beautiful. Like, it's both, it can be sad, but it can be beautiful. It's like rain. So that's where the piece's entire idea came from. And that's how I developed it, like trying to tell a story in a way where it didn't really have a plot or like a way of moving, but it's just supposed to make you like recognize that emotion. So keeping all of that in mind, let's look at the piece that was made by one of the students, and let's look into what they could try to do in order to develop their own harmonic line to further improve the sound of their piece. So here it is now. Now, that was only a segment of the piece, but from what I could hear, it sounds like the melodic, like the emotion, is very tense. It's hard to tell if it's meant to be something like, maybe frustration. But regardless, let's talk about how you can develop a chord progression over that. One of the things you could do is, observing, since you said you were aware of what key you're in, first thing you need to make sure of is that every note in that melodic line is diatonic to the key if you want diatonic harmony. If it's not all diatonic, then diatonic harmony can work, but it'll be more difficult to make it work. And I'm not saying things like, passing notes, like chromatic passing notes. Those are different. I'm talking about if you have a note in that melodic line which lands, on a beat in which you wish to have something like a chord. You need to make sure that that note in some way works harmonically with your diatonic harmony. Now, in terms of actually making a chord progression, there are a lot of ways that you could do it. You could try to make a chord progression which focuses on, the story you're trying to tell. If you want to know about that, you can look into things like Adam Neely's reharmonization of like several pop pieces in trying to tell a story, because in there he talks about like why you'd select certain chords to go over this predetermined melodic line, and it ends up sounding pretty incredible. So I'd recommend listening to that. You can do it a lot of the time. You can do harmony by ear, which is how I kind of did it, right? Because I played those triads by ear over time. And if I just read out what my chords technically are, for the first chord progression, it's A sus4 to C sus4 over G to F5 to D5 to A minor 9 over B to G7 over F to A minor 7 over G to C9 over D. And my second one is A minor 7 to F6-9 over G to G sus4 to D minor over A to C sus4 to A5 to G sus4 to A sus4. Now, was I aware of any of this when I was actually writing that chord progression? No, not at all. I was writing it based on the emotion I wanted to feel, and the emotion I wanted other people to feel when they were listening to my music. So, in creating your chord progression, you don't always have to have a full understanding of like, oh, how does everything resolve to one another? Sometimes it's just a matter of, do I think that this resolution sounds good? Because there's a lot of harmony which is focused only on the relationship between the chord and the note rather than the chords among themselves, and a lot of it does sound pretty beautiful. Now, there are other There are other harmonic options you can choose. If you want to look into something that's like incredible for harmony, in terms of just like dense and rich harmony, listen to anything by Jacob Collier. Man is a legend. I'll never understand how he's able to create the harmonic environments that he does. You can look into people like Andrew Huang, who talks a lot about their production process and how they've developed chord progressions based on their melodic lines. You can look into people like, again, Adam Neely. He goes in depth through a lot of these theoretical discussions. You can look at Rob Scallon. He does a lot of stuff on, actually producing music. So if you're trying to create a chord progression for something, it's a matter of your ear. You can draw inspiration from a lot of things. Like I drew my inspiration from a video game that I was enjoying playing, and I'm still enjoying playing because it's a wonderful game. As well as I drew inspiration from what I felt and then just played that emotion. Of course, you can also do things like, if you really want, a theoretical chord progression, one that's like theoretically perfect to whatever melodic line you've made, you can just do that via like research. You look into things like 20th Century Harmony is a good book for like more complex harmonic structures and explaining how exactly everything relates to one another. Although I'd argue that, attempting to achieve perfection in music kind of destroys the whole aim of music, because it's supposed to be an expression of human emotion, and human emotion isn't really perfect. But, the process in which you create your melodic line is entirely up to you. It's entirely up to you to develop it, to play it how you see fit, to place it rhythmically. It's entirely up to you to decide that. And I know I didn't tell you, what are the exact chords that you should have for this melodic line that you've made, but it's really just a matter of what do you want to convey with your harmony. If you want to convey frustration, if you want to convey, kind of like an algorithmic sound, 12-tone serialism, whatever you want. If you want it to be like just extremely tense, very dissonant, if you want it to be consonant, if you want to feel, an emotion of joy or deep sadness, that's entirely up to you to create that progression. And it doesn't have to be theoretically perfect. It can be, whatever you want it to be, because music is entirely up to the person making it. So I hope you enjoyed this more relaxed session. My only assignment for people this time is for you to create a piece of music, really, just because it's good to just start making music. It's very beneficial. It can be very relaxing if you enjoy it. So just have some fun. Create something beautiful, create something sad, create something ugly. It's entirely up to you. So with that, I'm going to say good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And I hope you enjoyed.